Oh, hi there. Glad you stopped by. Have you ever wondered what the significance of Good Friday is? I mean, what's so good about Good Friday? Well, being in the Easter season and all, if you're a Christian, I would imagine that you know something about it, though I'm also imagine that maybe some information has slipped through the cracks. And if you're not a Christian, well, I imagine it's possible that you don't know much about it at all. One thing to know about Good Friday is it's the third most significant holiday for Christians next to Easter and Christmas. I guess the historical significance about Good Friday, succinctly, is that it's the time that Christians commemorate the death of Jesus on the cross. I'm sure some of you heard about that, but basically, it's the time that we honor the fact that Jesus, the Son of God, came to earth and allowed himself to be crucified. And crucifixion was a horrible death. But beyond that, it has a very personal significance to me. Um, for me, it's the anniversary of the time when I became a Christian many years ago. And I'd like to tell you that story. So we have the historical significance of, it being the time when Jesus was crucified. And then, of course, a few days later, Jesus rising from the dead. And that's when we celebrate Easter as Christians. And the personal significance for me, which I'm going to share my story, but there's also an integral significance. The integral significance is not just for Christians, but for non Christians as well. It's very profound, and I would ask you, no, I would challenge you to stay to the end so that you could understand about the integral significance of Good Friday. Yeah, I don't think you're going to want to miss this. But as far as my story goes, well, I guess we could go back to college. Yeah, when I was at college, I was excited and thinking that I was gonna, have a great life and all that kind of stuff, and it didn't turn out that way. I didn't exactly fit in. In fact, I was really quite an outcast. Um, I tried to go to the dorms, thinking that maybe would work out better for me, and it didn't. I was even more of an outcast. Well, sometime around this time, I had gotten so depressed, even thinking suicidal, and got involved in alcohol and drugs, which I realize is not necessarily completely unusual. But I guess what made it a little unusual for me is that my family had alcohol and drugs as a lifestyle. Yeah, lots of crime, and I had lived a lot of my life in the inner city, and I had vowed that I would never go down that path. And that made me getting involved with drugs and drinking a lot more devastating to me because I had broken a vow to myself that I wouldn't go down the path of my family. Well, I was reaching my lowest point, and I tried to tap into some of the things that I had learned, in high school. I had studied Eastern mysticism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. I'd also learned a lot about Mormonism, the Jehovah's Witness, and a lot of other just different things, Islam, and try to tap into those kinds of spiritual things and philosophies to try to get more meaning in my life, and none of it worked. None of it worked at all. One thing I discovered is that there was a commonality between all of it, and that's that as long as your good outweighs your bad, and you try hard, you earn your ticket. And your ticket being whatever that particular religion or philosophy offers you. Heaven, nirvana, enlightenment, peace and satisfaction. Um, but none of it ever worked for me. Well, one time when I was in dorms, I was walking down the hall, and I poked my head in someone who had their door open. And again, during this time, I was really lonely, and I was willing to try to connect with anyone. And the girl inside said, "Hey, come on in." And so I, came on in, and I saw that she was reading the Bible, and I pointed that out. I was, "Oh, you reading the Bible there?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, you know about the Bible?" I said, "Oh yeah, of course. I read the Bible. I hadn't read much." And I said, "Yeah, Jesus. I know about him." "Oh, what do you know about Jesus?" she said. I said, "Well, he was a good teacher. He taught about love and harmony, and you know, um, he's very gentle guy." And she's like, "No, that's not what Jesus is like at all. Jesus is a radical." I'm like, huh? Well, I didn't quite understand what she meant by that, and she said, "Hey, why don't you come to a Bible study?" And so I decided I would check it out. So I do that, and being depressed, I really wasn't in great shape. I went there all kind of disheveled and whiskers and a wrinkly trench coat. Went in there, and they were looking at me like, "What in the heck are you doing here?" But she said, "Oh yeah, come on, sit down." And so I did that, and I was always asking the questions you're not supposed to ask because I just really wanted to know. And I didn't grow up in the church and anything like that. And I decided to keep coming, and I became really obsessed with trying to figure out if Jesus is the way. You see, what I figured, like I said about all the other religions and philosophies, they all had that commonality that, just let your good outweigh your bad and you earn your ticket. But with Christianity, Jesus was essentially saying you cannot earn your ticket. There's nothing you can do to earn it. Instead, you have to receive it as a gift of mercy. Um, that was different. And so I decided that I was going to find out everything I could about Christianity and Jesus because I figured, well, because this message is completely different, if it's true, then that's the one I should embrace. But if it's not true, then, well, anything else will do because they all were basically the same. Again, let your good outweigh your bad, and then you earn your ticket. Well, I started beginning to adopt the things that I saw in the Bible and started acting like them, talking like them, and they thought I was a Christian. And they were like, "Oh, you're a Christian." And I said, "No, I don't really think I am." It's like, "Well, what's going on?" I said, "It hasn't clicked yet." And they didn't understand that. But I knew that if I was going to call myself a Christian, I had to be all in. And that's what I told them. And they still didn't quite get it. But I knew that being a Christian is more than just, intellectually believing about Jesus dying on the cross. And it was more than just believing that, yeah, Jesus died for our sins. Yeah, that's kind of it. But there was a missing element. And at the time, I didn't quite figure out what it was. Well, one evening, or I guess perhaps a morning, I had a really weird dream. This is where things get a little strange, but I'll go ahead and share it. Um, I had this dream that a spider was talking to me and then jumped underneath my shirt and then told me, "If you move, I'm going to kill you." Now you got to understand, I had this horrible phobia of spiders from since I was a kid. And there's a story behind that, but maybe I'll tell it another time. But and then as the spider was underneath my shirt, crawling underneath my shirt, I just woke up, and I'm just like, ugh, sweating, and just like, okay. And so I call up one of my friends from this Christian group, and say, "Hey, can I come over to your place and study?" And she's like, "Sure." In those times in college, it was just common to go over people's house to study and together and kind of keep each other accountable. So I gave that a shot, and a funny thing happened. Now again, this gets even a little weirder. When I was trying to study, I just started feeling really weird, really anxious, and next thing I know, I just have this sense like spiders are all around the apartment. And I could almost see them. And she's looking at me and says, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine at all. And it suddenly hit me. You know, I was either going to choose God and choose Christ, or I was going to be with the devil. And I had this strong sense like the devil was hot on my tail, and it's like either the kingdom of light or the kingdom of darkness, that there's no in between. And it just hit me, and everything kind of made sense. And I realized, I had to choose Jesus, because otherwise I was lost, you know. And so I asked her, say, hey, can I pray? I want to become a Christian. She's like, what? And so she prayed with me, and I decided to choose Jesus. And after I left, everything looked different. I kid you not, everything looked different. The trees looked different, the leaves, the grass, all the colors, everything was more vibrant. And I knew that my life was fully transformed. I realize everyone doesn't necessarily have a dramatic story like that, but for me it was very dramatic. And there's a lot of things that happened after that that were very dramatic. But I knew that I had made my final choice, that I was going to be with God. And the historical significance of Good Friday is just simply about Jesus dying on the cross. And then the personal significance, there you have it, my story. And what's especially poignant is that it's my anniversary. It's my anniversary of choosing to become a Christian, to follow Jesus on Good Friday. And, well, there's also an integral significance that's important not just for Christians, but for non-Christians. It's important for all of you. You may not realize this, but it's actually very important, and there's no avoiding it. Here, let me explain it this way. God is the almighty creator of everything seen and unseen. And because God created, he calls the shots. And part of his shots is that he's made rules and ways that he demands that we follow. Some people might think of things like the Ten Commandments, but there's a lot more to it than that. And if I'm honest, we all know that we have failed to do things the right way. I mean, even without looking into the Bible, you and I both know that we've done horrible things. And we've done things that are just not necessarily good. Maybe we haven't been as kind to people as we could have, or if we lied, we cheated, we've stolen, we've done a lot of different things, and God being the creator and being perfect and pure in every way, he demands perfection. As the creator and as perfect and pure, he has the right to demand perfection. And if we are not perfect, then, well, what the Bible says is that by not being perfect, we earn death. Maybe you remember the story about Adam and Eve, and they ate the forbidden fruit that God told them not to eat. And God told them, when you eat that fruit, you're going to die. Well, they actually didn't die immediately physically, but they did die spiritually. And what does that mean? Well, death means separation. And so when we die, our spirit and soul, our inner person, if you would, separates from the body. But when Adam and Eve chose to eat that forbidden fruit and disobey God, that was the beginning of spiritual death. In other words, human beings being separated from God. And every time we do something wrong, it continues to add up the debt, add up the debt, add up the debt. And this is where the integral significance of Good Friday comes in to all of us. You see, we would have to pay that debt to God ourselves unless he provided some way for that debt to be paid. And God himself being so loving, he provided that way. And Jesus coming down and dying on the cross was that payment. He died the death to pay the debt that we owe. And we have a choice. We have a choice. And everyone has to make a choice, and everyone will make a choice. Oh yes, everyone will make a choice. we either choose to believe that the significance that God said the cross has is true, and that when he 3 days later on Easter morning rose from the dead, that we believe that indeed happened and that it was the evidence to prove that Jesus was who he said he was. We can choose to embrace that, or we can choose to reject it, or there is a third option. We can choose just to ignore it, but that doesn't work, because unless we fully embrace it, unless we fully believe that Jesus is who he said he was, unless we choose to receive it for ourselves, to receive God's payment through Jesus' death on the cross as the payment for the debt of all the wrongdoings we've done, then we're lost. Now, I'm sure there are some people who say, well, maybe it's not a big deal. I'll go to that other place and I'll be with my friends and we can just hang out and, just have a good time. But the thing is, the Bible says that all good gifts come from above. And that's basically meaning that everything good comes from God. So if we're not with God after we die, everything that has any sense of goodness will not be there. Happiness, peace, contentment, rest, camaraderie, fun, all those are good things, and those are good things that are gifts from God. And if we don't have the debt paid for all of our wrongdoings, then we can't get into heaven to be with God, and then we go to the other place where nothing good is there. Nothing good is there. Just imagine none of the things that bring you any kind of satisfaction would be there, and that would be torture. And that's exactly what it is. And so that's the significance of Good Friday. In a couple more days, on Sunday morning, we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus rising from the dead, which proves that he is who he said he was. But on Good Friday, we commemorate his death on the cross, which was the penalty that we owed because of our wrongdoing. So that's the choice that we all have to make. Do we choose to accept God's mercy, God's payment for our wrongdoing, or do we just reject it, or do we ignore it? Rejecting it and ignoring it is the same thing. So we make a decision by intention, or we make a decision by default. I would pray that you would make a decision by intention to choose Jesus. I don't know if I can say much more than that. I imagine you can have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of objections that you might have, a lot of things that don't make sense. Because today I just kind of wanted to highlight the importance, or at least the significance, of Good Friday. And if you have questions, ask, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find it. That's my promise. You can reach out. You can leave me a note, comment, and I will answer. I have so much more to say. I sometimes can ramble. That's what people who know me say. But I think I've said enough. At least hopefully I've given you enough to think about. But please choose Jesus. Choose Christ. Choose the way of God. Choose the way of life. It's the only way to fly. Well, hasta la pasta, and we'll see each other soon. Until we meet again.